Historic Preservation Board will be conducting a virtual meeting this evening in accordance with the governor's executive order related to conducting local government public meetings while under the public health emergency related to COVID-19. The public can view a live stream of this meeting at www.fortlauderdale.gov/FLTV. To participate in the meeting, please fill out the virtual meeting form on the city's website at www.fortlauderdale.gov/government/HPV. Individuals who wish to speak will be heard prior to the close of the public comment period. If you have trouble signing up, please email planning@fortlauderdale.gov or call 954-828-5265. Please provide your name and address. If you cannot be identified, you will not be provided with access to the meeting. Participants, please remember to mute yourself if you are not speaking and silence any other devices and speakers so we do not hear interference. I will now turn it over to our acting chair, Arthur.
Actually, I'm here. Oh. I appreciate it.
Never mind. I'll turn
Sorry,
it
Arthur.
All right.
All right, so we will officially call this meeting to order. It is 5:01 p.m. on October 5th of 2020. Why don't we get started with the Pledge of Allegiance first? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. With that, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes. We can start with that. Let's see, has everybody on the board had a chance? Actually, have we called roll yet before we get that far?
No, not yet.
All right, Jamie, can we go ahead and call the roll to ensure that we have a quorum, please?
Yeah, sure. Mr. Carney?
Present.
Ms. Lyons?
Could you just verbally say present, unmute yourself?
Present. Thank you. Mr. Marcus?
Present.
Mr. Parker? Mr. Parker? I see him there. It's okay.
Dave, we need you to unmute yourself, please.
I did.
There we go.
Mr. Rosa?
Here.
Mrs. Zara? Mr. Chavon?
Present.
And Chair Blank.
I am present as well.
You have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And good evening to everybody, board members. It's good to see everyone. Thank you for being here. We're glad that we've got the ability to move forward on these items. I'm sure that Mr. Rosa is extremely excited, happy about that this evening. So with that, let's get moving forward. We are going to look, let's take a look at the minutes and if there aren't any amendments, I'd hear them now. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
All right, moved by Mr. Rosa. Mr. Carney, you good to second?
I'll second it.
Great, thanks and welcome to the party. I appreciate it.
Just one detail. We have 2 sets of minutes that need to be approved this month, actually.
Oh my gosh, you're right. So let me back up for a minute. Mr. Rosa, I'm assuming that your motion was as to the August minutes? Would that be correct? That'd be correct. Mr. Carney, am I correct that your second of that motion was understanding that it was for the August minutes?
August, there was not appointed to the board. Would that be a problem?
Well, you know what, to be safe, let's see if there's a member who was on the board at that time that would be willing to second Mr. Rosa's motion instead.
I will second.
Thank you, Arthur. We appreciate that. So we have a motion by Mr. Rosa, a second by Mr. Marcus to approve the August minutes from our August 3rd meeting. Any discussion on that motion? And if there are no changes, all in favor, we'll take a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? All right, the August minutes are approved. Let's move on to the September minutes. Does anybody have any comments or modifications to the September minutes as they've been posted? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the September minutes.
So moved.
All right, moved by Mr. Chavon. Tim, good to see you. Do we have a second to Mr. Chavon's motion?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. Appreciate that. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we'll do a voice vote. All in favor of approving the September minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Great, hearing none, that motion will carry. September minutes are approved. Thank you, everyone. Let's see, the next item on the agenda is the public sign-in and swearing in. Shari, have we had everybody sworn in who is on the list to address the board tonight?
No, not yet. I will be glad to do so now, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone who is wishing to speak tonight, please raise your right hand. Do you swear and unmute yourself? IT guy, can you unmute whoever's speaking, which is, I think, what's her name? Jane. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I got to hear from Jane, and
There, she's unmuted.
speaking too, right?
She's on mute.
Unmute, please. And IT, can you unmute Jane? Okay, I could just right before the item since it's not being done now.
That'd be fine. Thank you, because we'll move along. We'll come back to it. I think Jane's on here, so that's good. All right. So let's see. The first agenda item here is a certificate of appropriateness for major alteration deferred from September 8th, 2020. Case number PLN HPCOA 2007003. The request is for a replacement of existing barrel tile roof with new metal roof on a primary residential structure located at 801 Southwest 4th Street, as well as the replacement of an existing asphalt shingle roof with new metal roof oops, I just lost my, there we go, on the accessory residential structure at 315 Southwest 8th Ave. With that, let's go ahead and hear from staff on this item. Staff report?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. As Jason mentioned, this property has two structures on it, a primary structure and an accessory structure. Both requests are related to the removal of the existing asphalt shingle roof and replacement with a new metal roof. The primary structure, as far as the original permit is concerned, it shows kind of an asphalt shingle roof at the time of construction, and now it has a barrel tile roof. It's uncertain when that barrel tile roof was installed. There isn't a permit record showing that installation date. And the request is to put a blue slate colored metal roof on it. And the other property or structure that's located behind the primary structure is facing 8th Avenue. And there wasn't an original permit on file for this property. The original date of construction was a little later, as far as I could tell, in 1944. The main structure, the permit record showed 1937. And the original roofing material for this structure was most likely a rolled asphalt or an asphalt shingle. And now they're asking to put the same blue slate colored metal roof on that secondary structure as well. So you can see here the one-story residence in the front, and then the accessory structure in the rear. And you can see the photo on your screen of the original permit elevation. It's a little fuzzy, but it's the best we could do. And then that blue slate color is shown on the screen of what was selected, and it's included in your packets. And then that secondary structure is in the rear of the primary structure. With that being said, the main house, the primary structure, there's no historical basis to make the decision to replace what we know what was original to the structure with a metal roof. However, with the accessory structure, the board in other cases has made a determination when there hasn't been information pertaining to the original permit to allow for a replacement roof from whatever the existing is to a metal roof. So it's a little bit different in this case. So with that being said, staff finds that both requests for the certificate of appropriateness for major alterations under this case for both the property or for the main structure, that it does not meet the criteria as outlined in section 472411 D3CI, and it meets the criteria for consideration of materials as listed under 4717(7)B of the ULDR. And then there's a condition that's provided in your staff memorandum for your consideration if you do approve this application, that this application is subject to the approval of building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements.
Thank you so much, Trish. So with that, we're going to go through disclosures. Let's start. I'm just going to go through by the way that I see them on my screen. So Mr. Chavone, any disclosures to make in this property?
No, I do not. I don't have any disclosures.
Thank you so much. Mr. Carney, any disclosures, a drive-by, visits, anything of that nature?
No, sir.
Thank you so much. Mr. Marcus?
No disclosures.
Thank you. Ms. Lyons?
I drove by.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Parker, any disclosures on this one? Oh, Dave, you're muted. Sorry, buddy. There you go. Now you're good. Any disclosures, Dave? Mr. Parker, any disclosures? Oh, you just muted. There you go.
I unmuted it.
Well, now you're remuted, but you were unmuted. You're still muted. Stop. You're good. We're good. Now we're unmuted.
Okay. I did visit.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All
Mr.
right.
Rosa?
Drive by. Yeah.
All right. And I think that's it. Were there any board members that I missed? All right. Wonderful. So is the applicant present? I believe that would be Ms. Jane Brito Gonzalez. I see her on here.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, good evening. Ms. Brito Gonzalez, since we couldn't hear you earlier, I'm going to ask the city attorney to go ahead and swear you in, and then we'd be happy to hear from you on this item.
Hello, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I need a yes.
Yes, I do. I'm sorry. I did hear you.
Thank
That's
you.
okay. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. All right, Ms. Brito Gonzalez, go ahead and state your name, your address, your association to the application, and we'd be happy to hear anything else you'd like to present.
Oh, hi. My name is Jane Brito Gonzalez. I'm the contractor for Allstate Roofing Services. The property the two structures in her property to the metal roof. The color is slate blue.
Ms. Brito Gonzalez, you're cutting in and out a little bit. I see that you've been muted. You might have muted yourself by accident. I just want to make sure that we're not missing anything that you think is important for the board to say. Could you go ahead and repeat that for us, please?
No, that the property owner contracted us to replace the roof of the two structures to the metal roof. The color, the slate blue color.
Okay, and were you the one who filed the application on this item?
Yes, I filed it for the property owner.
Okay. All right, is there anything else that you'd like the board to consider as it relates to your application at this time?
No, I think I included everything that was necessary with the document.
Okay, thank you so much. Just stand by. We might come to you with some questions from the board in a minute. Is there anybody else from the public who wishes to be heard on this item?
None from the public.
All right.
Jason, just a reminder, we did receive a letter from Mr. Ken Powell and via email that was forwarded onto the board the other day. I see that Ken is logged in. He didn't sign up to speak, but I don't know if he was wishing to speak.
I'll tell you, I would certainly be happy to hear from Mr. Powell if he wished to address us as a member of the public on this, or if not, or if he's unable to, because I think he expressed in his correspondence that he didn't know if he'd be able to attend or at least participate. So I don't know if he's just kind of listening and somewhere the reason unable to speak. That's fine. I would ask for maybe or I would just ask to incorporate his correspondence to the board on this item as part of the record on this issue. So, Mr. Powell, if you're here and you want to be heard, let us know and we can swear you in. I have no problem with that. All right, I'm going to guess that Mr. Powell either is unable to speak to us or is satisfied with the comments he previously provided. I would move Mr. Powell's correspondence into the record on this item as part of the minutes and as part of the record for the board's consideration. Did everybody on the board have a chance to review that correspondence that was sent out via email?
I did not.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Let me see.
Was it in support or against the idea?
Let me double check. I'm just pulling it up here because there were a couple of issues here. I'm reviewing the correspondence that was forwarded to the board on Wednesday, September 30th at 5:13 p.m. by Ms. Logan. And Tim, we'll make sure that Trish sends that out to you again, just so you have it in your files. Mr. Powell noted that he wanted to commend the board for continuing meetings during the pandemic, but he wished that there was a better way for us to have meetings for public representation, than the virtual meetings. But candidly, I think that we're doing a decent job of trying to incorporate the public as best we can here under these circumstances. But he wanted to make sure that we heard his voice, and so he submitted the written comment and asked for it to be part of the minutes and for our consideration. He noted that the applications repeatedly referred to the 2009 Sailboat Bend Historic District survey. He saw some issues with that survey being repeatedly referenced because of its age and because of some questions as to, I guess, the procedure at the time it was passed or it was commissioned. He noted that it was referenced in the staff report on this case. He thought that because of the use of the 2009 study, he thought that was a little concerning and somewhat misleading. He felt that he feels that the design guidelines for the historic structure should be reviewed and revised to better align with safer products that provide longevity. Of course, I take no position on that. I don't think that is a right issue for this. But he says that he doesn't know if we have the power or inclination to improve the relations within Sailboat Bend, but he wanted to raise the concerns as a way to, as he put it, to expose an ongoing and pervasive problem. So I'm not sure that, it seems from the comments that Mr. Powell is in favor of the applicant. He thinks that these new roofing materials should be acceptable. He also just noted some general things, which I think might be better addressed for the good of the city area as opposed to on this specific item. But I just think it's important that since it was specifically addressing this item that we discuss it, we address it. I want to make sure the board was aware of it. So that was kind of a summary as I'm reading through his notes here. So with that, and seeing no other members of the public present to address it, I'll turn it to the board. Are there any questions for Ms. Brito Gonzalez on this or for Ms. Logan on this item?
Jason, Arthur, Marcus, I have a question. I guess it's a question and a comment. Part of this is to Tricia. We've dealt with this issue before. And, I have to agree with Mr. Powell that we've talked about updating the guidelines because I agree that I think a metal roof on this age of home is a much better material choice for the long term, as can be seen all over Key West. So the question is it a matter of updating the guidelines, or why haven't we included standing seam metal roofs before?
So standing seam metal roofs are an option within the material and design guidelines, but looking at the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic preservation, when considering a replacement material, it should be in line and in keeping with the historic material. And in the case of the primary structure, we know what that original material was. So something that is in keeping with that would be most appropriate, particularly because that primary structure we know was built prior to 1940 and was considered, as Mr. Powell pointed out, part of the most significant structures in the neighborhood in the original survey. Then with the secondary structure, we don't have the original permits. So in that case, we, in other cases where we don't have historical documentation, when it's an appropriate style, we have allowed the replacement of, say, an asphalt shingle roof, like it is in this case, with a standing seam metal roof. And it's been in similar cases where the property has been more of a minimal traditional type home, and that has been approved by the board.
So Trish, is that the basis, and Arthur, I'm sorry to kind of step on your question, but I was thinking kind of the same thing. Is that the basis as to why you found that it didn't meet in one part, but it kind of did as well? The material itself meets, but just the structure, you found that it didn't meet.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was a little unsure.
The secondary structure most likely was constructed with some sort of rolled asphalt or flat material, most likely not a standing seam metal roof. But like I said, there's been other cases where it's been warranted or granted.
Okay. Thank you. Arthur, any other questions, or anybody else have any other questions for Trish?
The only other comment I have is I'd like to hear from Dave and hear his thoughts on his district. If he'd like to.
He was unmuted and then muted again. And is he gone now?
Muted.
Still muted.
You may have just hit the video instead of the audio.
Yeah.
There you go. You're unmuted, Dave.
Okay.
There we go.
In our neighborhood, in terms of right now, there's a lot of discussion in terms of people are concerned about in terms of the weather indications, hurricanes, and the protection. And there are some in the neighborhood that have the metal roofs, and they're received within the neighborhood favorably. And so I don't know whether or not I know what the guidelines are and so forth like that, but there is effort within our neighborhood. And that's one of the concerns that people have, that it's very restrictive when it comes to protection for hurricanes. And we right now have several people who are very strongly opposed to things within our board, of course, and whatnot. And so I can say that's on the table right now.
Are you in the Sailboat Bend area, David?
Yeah, I live in the corner of Charlie or 8th Avenue and 2nd Court.
You're the former president of the community association, aren't you?
I was. I've been several times when people come for a year and disappear, and I've gone back in, but I'm not going back in. I've too many years. I'm 79, and it's time for me to end that.
Okay.
I'm participation only.
All right. Are there any other, David, thanks so much for the input there. It's always really important.
I just would like to finish up my comments.
Yeah, please.
I feel strongly, as Dave has mentioned, that some of the residents have said so, that this becomes a safety issue. And I think in terms of hurricanes, in terms of the increasing severity of the weather, I think we are remiss in not including something like standing seam metal roofs as an option for the roof. And I've always said, I've said this before, but I do think the guidelines need to be changed.
I'm wondering also, to comment with that, Arthur, I'm wondering I know we shouldn't get into colors and things like that, but I think, to me, the more acceptable would be, like a silver or something or muted gray, because the blue sort of gives it a little bit of a different view, a different appearance to it. But I don't know. I'm just throwing that in.
I guess I've learned from experience, I don't comment on color unless it really...
I know. I've been here long enough. I shouldn't either, but I did.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your comments, gentlemen. Anybody else want to address, have any questions or any comments on this item before we move forward? All right, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion at this time if there is one on this item.
I'll make a motion to approve it.
Okay.
All right.
Tim, I can tell you that Shari's going to say, can you be more specific as to what it is that we're approving and what the factual findings are of the board? So keep it broad. Let's see if we can.
I do not have the specific definition of this application in front of me as it is spelled out in terms. However, I would like to make a motion to approve this subject that's in front of the board at this time in reference to the 2 roofs that are going to be replaced.
Would you like to?
With the findings of fact as outlined in the staff memorandum, Tim, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And subject to the condition that the application is also subject to approval by the building, zoning, and all other ULDR requirements?
Absolutely.
I understood that you mean that. I just wanted to make sure.
I'm with you all the way.
Is there a second to Mr. Chabot's motion?
I'll second.
Thank you. Seconded by Mr. Marcus. Any discussion?
May I read the resolution?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. A resolution of the Historic Preservation Board of the City of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, approving a certificate of appropriateness for major alterations for the property located at 801 Southwest 4th Street, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to replace an existing barrel tile roof with a new metal roof on the primary residence and to replace an existing asphalt shingle roof with a new metal roof on an accessory residential structure located at 315 Southwest 8th Avenue, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Case number PLN HP COA 2007-0003.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wallen. Mr. Marcus, you seconded the motion?
I did.
Great. I don't know if there's any other discussion on the motion, but I just want to point out that I think the board is doing something really good here tonight, noting that, sometimes we need to be somewhat flexible within our bounds of what we can do, to approve these types of applications, as long as we have the power to do so. I think this is a unique situation where we do have the power. It's within our guides. It's within the 4 corners of the application for us to make a decision like this, even though it goes against partially the staff recommendation based on the DR criteria. But I think that we're doing the right thing here, and I think that this is a good time for us to take action to be helpful, and that's I certainly am in favor of the motion. So any other comment or conversation, discussion on the motion?
I just have one comment before you take a vote, is that, and this would be more directed towards Tricia, but as I've mentioned, this issue has come up repeatedly in the past, and what will it take at some point to have the guidelines changed so that people don't have to go through this whole approval process? Or they still may.
Perhaps this is something we could discuss for the good of the city.
Yeah, let's do that, Arthur. Hold that thought. Let's talk about that a little bit later on the agenda, because I think it's a well taken point that we do need to address. But just let's hold off on that for now. All right. So with that, I think that we'll ask for we could do a voice vote on this. All in favor of the motion to approve, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed to the motion? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much. Congratulations, Ms. Brito Gonzalez. Your application is approved. Let's move on to the next item on agenda, item 4.B, Certificate of Appropriateness for Major Alteration deferred from September 8th, 2020. Case number PLN HP COA 2008-0001. It's an after-the-fact board-on-board fence along both side property lines of the front yard at 1010 Southwest 2nd Court. Let me just confirm, Mr. Rosa, is this your application?
It is.
So are you abstaining from any matters as a board member on this issue?
That's correct. Form 8B, the memorandum of conflict of interest, has been provided prior to the meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. With that, Trish, we'll take the staff report on this one.
Sure. As Jason mentioned, this property is in the Sailboat Bend Historic District. It's a new construction property. I'm going to share my screen so you can see the images. And the duplex was approved as new construction by the HPB in January 2019. And there's been a couple of modifications to the structure throughout the last year and a half or so, including some changes to the roofing material and some changes to the exterior facade that have gone through the 15-day call-up and through another board hearing. So at this time, what's under consideration is the fence that's along the front of the property. It wasn't included in the original application, and our design guidelines state that any fencing that's in front of the property is limited to a height of 3 feet, which this fence is, and it needs to be 30% open, which this fence isn't. So that's why it's in front of you tonight, so that you can review this fencing and the locations that are highlighted on your screen, and the fact that the fencing does not provide the 30% visibility as outlined within the design guidelines. So in conclusion, staff finds that the application for a COA for major alterations under this case located at 1010 Southwest 2nd Court partially meets the criteria as outlined in section 472411D3CI of the ULDR and meets the criteria for consideration of materials as listed under 4717-7B of the ULDR.
Thank you so much, Trish. We're going to go through before hearing from the applicant or the public, and let's do any disclosures. Mr. Carney?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you so much. Mr. Marcus?
No disclosures.
Mr. Parker? Nope, you just muted yourself again. You were unmuted. So close.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. I visited the property.
All right, thank you, Mr. Parker. Mr. Chavone?
No, I did not.
Ms. Lyons?
Yes, I did.
All right, thank you. You visited, drive by?
Yes.
Okay.
I was a good guy. I stopped the car, got out of the car, looked at it.
Looked around. Gotcha.
Got out of the car, but I didn't go onto the property.
You mean you didn't like set up camp, start a grill, nothing like that? Did I miss any board members? You have a couple of beers with Mr. Rosa. Any board members that I missed? All right, great. Mr. Rosa, as the applicant, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I just want to start by saying thank you to Trisha. I know the last meeting obviously did not take place as planned. And in light of that, the last 30 days has gone by, and Trisha and staff have been tremendously helpful in navigating what was otherwise the original application and helping us close that out subject to this next item. But it's been tremendously helpful, and I can't commend enough how helpful it was and how reassuring it was to work through that process in light of COVID, in light of all the remote, in light of really a limited accessibility to the city. So I just wanted to mention that before getting started. So thank you, Trisha. This is just simply the fence. It's the 36-inch fence that comes out, really what's pulling from the front of the house to the right of way. And, I think staff wrote a great memorandum here, but I think one part of it, in my interpretation, is not correct. And that is in the Sailboat Bend Historic Preservation Guidelines in the site elements section specifically, it does cite fencing, and some of those items are brought up correctly as to what's encouraged and discouraged, but there's a couple items as well that are, I think the language is not quite as authoritative as being put forth here. So it states, similar to walls, fences in front yards should be limited to 36 inches in height, which is the case here. And then it uses the word preferably, and then preferably picket style that is at least 30% open. The way I interpret the word preferably is to be preferred to as of choice, as a matter of someone's choice, not shall be or must be, but rather we prefer it to be. So when I look at that and I say to myself, okay, they'd like to see that, but it's not exactly a must. I also weigh it against what's going on in this neighborhood. And Mr. Parker can attest to this as someone that lives in the neighborhood, but I'm sure all of you have driven through it often enough. You have a real clashing of new construction, which has certain finish elevations, and older construction, which does not. And when you don't provide for certain types of retaining from a civil engineering standpoint, you really create a problem. And it's not by fault of the new construction, and it's not by fault of a Florida building code, but you end up with an issue. And what this fence is doing is not just aesthetically putting itself in place to identify the boundary, which is one of the elements in the site elements section, but it's also serving as a retaining. because when this was not there and it would rain, the increased elevation of the site would cause tremendous flooding for the neighboring properties. And I don't believe that's at fault, again, from the new construction. But I certainly would empathize with the neighbors as to why that's frustrating. At one point, it did not exist. Now it does. And as a result, here it is. It's tremendously more helpful in its current form. If we were to go to removing 30% of it, it would lose its retaining integrity and it would be a mess. So we'd be going backward by doing it. And the reason I'm here paying a fee to discuss it is because I think it's a win-win for everyone and it doesn't in any way obstruct from the street view. I mean, I just don't see how in any way it pulls your eye away from the building or blocks your view. It doesn't do that. But I think that's a larger problem to maybe table for later in terms of understanding how this clashing is taking place with the engineering of these newer buildings and the older buildings. But again, to point to the matter at hand, I don't think it's a mandate that it be 30% open. The language quite literally says preferably picket style. So it's a vertical board. It does not have a 30% opening. And I don't think it should have a 30% opening in this case. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to field them and take them.
Mr. Rosa, appreciate your presentation. Before we go to questions, let me see if there's anybody from the public that would wish to be heard on this.
Certainly.
Do we have anybody from the public wishing to speak on this item? It doesn't appear that we do. If we do and I missed somebody, speak up and let me know, but it doesn't appear that we do. So this time I'll go ahead and close public comment. So let's bring it back to Mr. Rosa. If anybody from the board has any questions, there's just one point of clarification I want to ask real quick off the top. The section that you're referring to with the terminology preferably, that's the ULDR or that's the Sailboat Bend historic guidelines?
It's the historic preservation design guidelines in Sailboat Bend, right? It's not the ULDR.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right, any questions for Mr. Rosa or comments? Ms. Lyons, I see you raising your hand.
Well, I wondered if you were aware of the drainage problem before you started the project.
We were not. No, we were not aware of the drainage problem, but we have to meet certain elevation. And once the elevation started to build itself up, and actually once the driveway went in, we started to note and started to communicate, in fact, with the neighbor to the east. And I guess a long story, but related, they've put forth an application for a driveway to try to mitigate some of that drainage as a result of, it was an application that was submitted prior to this one, but they're going to bring it back, I think, at some point later next year. But we were not aware of it at the time of commencing construction.
Is there a way other than this fence to mitigate the drainage problem?
I would suppose that potentially there could be a way to engineer around it. I'm not an engineer, so I wouldn't know the answer to that, but I suppose there could be.
Were you aware of the picket fence and the issue of 30% visibility before you installed this fence?
Was I aware of the 30%? No, I was aware when staff brought it to my attention.
So, but you're on the board, right?
That's correct.
And you weren't aware of it?
I was not aware of it, but once it went in, the idea was potentially to modify it to meet that. But as we saw through summer, as the rains increased, it would have been, I think, absolutely detrimentally inconsistent with what we're trying to do here, which was engineer and mitigate the water runoff. Instead of utilizing the swale that we've dug into the front of the property, it would have avoided that and allowed for it to run off both east and west side, flooding the other neighbors. So it would be very bad for those neighboring properties. They would essentially get puddled and pooled consistently if we weren't to do that.
Won't the wood eventually rot?
I'm sure at some point it may, right? Some of these fences have been standing 25, 30 years, so they do have a good life to them.
In terms of its, aggravated assault with water. I mean, most fences don't have to function as barriers to retain drainage.
I'm not implying that it's an actual barrier, but it's certainly much better than nothing. If we were to pull it out, I think what you would have is a complete runoff. If you look at some of the pictures that Tricia put off, that mulch would essentially guide and glide out. And what you would have is sort of a, for lack of a better term or a technical term, it would sort of melt off, and it would create really just a worse and worse effect where you would have de facto runoff that would create pooling because of this convergence of new construction elevation and older elevation. It's just a reality, I think, of new construction going into neighborhoods like this, where the building grade is at a minimum based on Florida building code, but it doesn't sit well with the existing elevations of the buildings that are currently there, been there previously.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lyons. Any other comments, questions for Mr. Chavone? I see you raising your hand, I think.
Yeah, we have a new construction in Sailboat Bend. And are we then, regardless of whether it's new or not, following the guidelines for a fence that are set forth for historical buildings? Is that why we have the 30%, visibility? Is that something that's related to the historic preservation, or is that something that's for any fence that goes anywhere in the city?
It's for any fence that goes into either a historic district or is related to an individual historic landmark.
Yeah, and so the reason I'm asking, Trish, is for that very reason, in that I would expect that because we want to maintain our buildings and keep the historic preservation alive, and we want the general public to benefit from it, therefore they need to see it. But in the case of a new construction that doesn't have a historic value, I'm just throwing this out there, I don't see the same interpretation of why it would be necessary to have a 30% visibility, because they're not providing or maintaining or preserving a historical building.
Because it applies to the regulations of the area, not to a historic building. It applies to everything.
Yeah, well, that maybe needs to be looked at. That's my point exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just putting it out there.
If you approve this, then does it open the, here's the pun, floodgates for other construction that is similar that would be against the guidelines for the area?
Just,
in other words, is there going to be
it's just a thought. All it is. Open for discussion.
Yeah, but one thing I find somewhat persuasive is the language itself of the guidelines. And Mr. Rosa kind of brought that up. Rich, I'm actually having a little difficulty locating it where the preferable language is. I noted that when we look at the ULDR section 47-17.7A, which is the part where staff notes that your application meets criteria, they say that it's a maximum of 6 inches clear of spacing between the pickets. What I don't see in the prior section cited, or even the guidelines, is the word preferably 30% provided.
I believe, Mr. Chair, if you download you downloaded the guidelines, it's on page 100. At the bottom, it'll say page 2, and it's underneath fences at the end of that paragraph on the left.
Okay, let me get there. Sorry.
So it's actually within the Historic Preservation Design Guidelines for the City of Fort Lauderdale, which are available on our website. And
yes, I just told him what page, because I think he downloaded it. It's just the page he's looking
Correct.
for.
No, I got it here now. Yeah. I am looking at page 100 of the PDF document, noted as page 2 of the City of Fort Lauderdale Historic Preservation Design Guidelines site elements. And in the section noted fences, and I'm quoting here, I'm reading from the document, wood is a traditional material for fences in the City of Fort Lauderdale, with some fences being made from metal. Traditional fencing types not only marked the boundaries of a specific space, but also allowed visual access to and from the historic structures located on a property from the roadway. Similar to walls, fences in front yards should be limited to 36 inches in height and preferably picket style that is at least 30% open. So I find Mr. Rosa's point very persuasive. The guidelines don't say it must be. The guidelines really talk to what I see and interpret it to be options to allow the visibility to be unobstructed. And I'm not seeing anything in the application or in the staff report that seems to note that the selected fence as it's been chosen obstructs that view. The 36 inch height to me is more important than the picket style for this property as it's been described. And I think that allows the clear visibility of the historic, or the consistency of the visibility of the historic properties in the historic district. So I would tend to find Mr. Rosa's position quite persuasive and be in favor of the application, but certainly understanding Ms. Lyon's point of if we do this, do we open Pandora's box going forward? But in looking at the wording of the guidance, I mean, I think that he's well-founded.
Jason, it's Arthur. I wanted to follow up with what Barbara said. I thought that was a very good point in terms of setting a precedent, because unfortunately everything we do sets a precedent in some way in the district. With that being said, Barbara's hit on something else that I wanted to follow up on. That, Richard, as you said, this is much more than a fence. It really seems like a retaining wall. And one would not usually build a retaining wall, as you said, out of wood. But it seems like its primary purpose is not privacy, as a fence would be, but it's more keeping the water at bay, which is more what a retaining wall would do. I'm just wondering if that helps us in our determinations to try and not set a precedent for something later on. But of course, as an architect, I'll be the first one to say I don't think anybody would ever approve a wood wall as a retaining wall from moisture.
So I find Arthur and Ms. Lyons, I'm sure you're going to want to chime in either in support or opposition of Mr. Marcus's comment, but I just want to note, and because I had it up here, I looked right before fences. The section on walls actually is addressed, and interestingly, similar to the fence guidance, it says that it is recommended that walls in front yards be limited to 36 inches in height. Again, only commenting, I mean, they talk about the different materials for walls, and I know that this application is for a fence, but the height restriction is noted as well, and this would be in compliance there. So even if the board were to consider this in the realm of a wall, it appears that it generally would fit within the framework as described in the guidance. But Ms. Lyons, I'm sorry, I thought I saw you wanting to address something after Mr. Marcus.
I was just wondering, I don't have the information in front of me. Maybe it's in these documents, but I don't think so. And that is, what are the materials that are required if you're going to build a wall? Whoops.
I think required and suggested are two different.
What are suggested? What are the criteria for materials for building a retaining wall?
I can only tell you what I'm looking at here on the guidance. The guidance says, and I'll let Trish correct or add as needed, but it says landscape walls. These are landscape walls, right? Not retaining walls, so maybe different. But it says are typically constructed of masonry or concrete and often include a stucco finish. In some cases, landscape walls are constructed of decorative patterned block with openings to allow the passage of light and air.
So there's no way we could justify it as a retaining wall.
Probably not. and I think that's actually, I think we run into another issue of that's not what the application's for. So,
I'm not against Mr. Rosa's proposal. I'm just trying to figure out what we should be doing as a board.
So I'll tell you that my position, and I'll let everybody else speak up who wants to. My position has always been we should look to the letter of the law. We should interpret the law as it's written. We have to stay within the four corners of the application before the board. So I think that we should not, I like the idea. It's clever. It's creative to look at it as a wall, but I don't think that helps us. So I think let's go back to fences. When we look at fences, there's no strict requirement that there be this space. It's preferable, but it doesn't say shall be or even should be. at least 30% open. And because of that, I believe that that allows us the leeway to decide that that is not a requirement, but a suggestion. And my personal position is that we should not allow an application to fail on a suggestion if it otherwise meets criteria, which this appears to. So I would tell you that at this point in time, and looking at this language from the guidance, I would be in favor of the application, but that's just my personal opinion. But of course, if there are any other comments or questions to the board, let's make sure.
Just one.
Is Arthur still with us?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chavone wanted to be heard first, and then we'll shoot back to Mr. Marcus and then Ms. Lyons.
Yes, and believe me, I respect everybody's position on this, and I'm seriously not trying to open up a can of worms, but at the same time, I believe the sentence before the preferably the 30% visibility should be 36 inches. So both those ideas or both of those requirements are right next to each other. One is a should and one is a preferably. So when that was written and put forth, one is negotiable and one is not. And I agree with you in the way you described it, Jason. I don't think there's enough meat in the thing to say no to the 30% visibility, but had he asked to go 48 inches tall, we would be having a different conversation. So that's all I got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chavone. Mr. Marcus?
The only thing I was going to ask is our Mr. Sailboat Bend what Dave Parker thinks about this.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Marcus. Dave, you just muted yourself. You were off mute. You're getting this right, just backwards, but we'll get you.
Well, this thing is okay. Well, I'm backwards too.
You're great.
Well, I appreciate. I'm just concerned about people, your neighbors, and so forth. You know, they have the concern that the flooding. Is that correct?
They're concerned. Sure. Yeah, I've spoken to them on a number of occasions.
I'm wondering, you know, how we have to look at that, because if we do change it completely, we're opening it up, you know, into an opportunity that someone can do whatever they particularly want. And I mean, this is maybe too futuristic, but that property is across the street where you're going to have a development. And you and I both know in this neighborhood, we have areas of flooding because of the older landscape and newer and so forth. I'm just hoping that when we make a decision that we consider the whole community, in this case, the people. I mean, I like fences, and I do in that respect. I think they help not only delineate the property and everything, but when you have to consider the water and the flooding, that's the kind of thing that, and I think we have to put in our minds and to make understanding, and so that we don't maybe set something in precedent that's going to inhibit us from as development goes on. That's all I'm saying.
Point well taken.
Could I just raise this point once again?
Yeah, please.
Could you clarify, Richard, when you built this building, was there flooding there to begin with, or did the building itself cause the flooding? And did you originally intend the fence to be a retaining wall, or were you aware of the problem? I'm now trying to remember what you said.
There was a building at one point that was demolished. When we acquired the property, it was just a vacant lot. So our interpretation of whatever we were perceiving at the time couldn't have been really expected to last because we were going to build on it. And as we built on it, we started to see, as I mentioned, when the driveway went in, that there were some drainage issues. And keep in mind, there is a drain running the entire front section of this driveway. It's not as if we're intending for this de facto retainage. I think my point was being in some ways misconstrued. All I was getting at is going away from a low wood picket fence, which is what's emphasized, in my view, is more decorative than anything else, is to take away the ancillary benefit of this fence not having openings. I'm not trying to imply or intend that it's a retaining wall. If we were going to build a retaining wall, we would have built a retaining wall. And had we gone back in time, maybe that would have been more sound. And maybe that's something we can look at in the future as to something that should be reviewed. But at this point, we went in with what was put forth as the engineering requirements, and we met them and we built them as such. It was never our intention to build to have this be a retaining wall. I'm just saying if we were to remove it and slice this up as indicated, it would only make the problem worse. It wouldn't make it any better. That's all I meant by my comment regarding it holding the site a little tighter. That's all I meant. But no, we were unaware of it.
Thank
I
you.
have one more question for Richard.
Yeah, please.
You show minimal landscaping around in the pictures. Will there be more to conceal it better?
Well, the plant that's in front of there is called a coffee. Not sure. It's a coffee plant. It gets to be really what is a bush. So you won't even see the fence in about 6 months. That bush will be about at height of that fence. So it will be.
Is it going to grow the length of the fence?
It will grow. Yes, it'll run. So they're planted about, I don't know, one plant apart. So they will eventually come together, and it will eventually look like a hedge, and it'll be trimmed like a hedge at that point.
Okay. Thank you so much. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Rosa? All right. So with that, I will entertain a motion if there is one from the board. Has to be a motion if we're going to move this along.
I'll make a motion
Okay.
to approve the definition of this application. If you want to read it to me, or Sherry wants to read it to me.
So you're looking to approve the resolution for a certificate of appropriateness for major alterations in this case, based on the findings of fact in the staff memorandum?
Yes.
Okay. Sherry, do you want to go ahead and read that certificate of appropriateness? I'm sorry, that resolution, so that we can see whether or not somebody would like to second the motion?
Sure. A resolution of the Historic Preservation Board of the City of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, approving a certificate of appropriateness for a major alteration after the fact for the property located at 1010 Southwest 2nd Court, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to modify a previously approved certificate of appropriateness. Case number PLN HPCOA 19110002 for the placement of a 36-inch high vertical wood board-on-board fence in the front yard.
Thank you so much. Is there a second to Mr. Chavon's motion? We need a second.
Yes,
I'm sorry? Mr. Marcus, you second?
I will second.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marcus, seconding. All right, is there any discussion on the motion before we take a vote? Hearing none, why don't we do this as a roll call vote? If I could ask Jamie to call the roll for the vote.
Mr. Carney,
Approve. Yay.
Ms. Lyons. Abstain. I'm sorry, was that a yes? Pardon? Abstain.
Why are you abstaining? What's the reason? Yeah, you can only abstain if you have a conflict.
Because I think a clause should be attached somehow that qualifies and quantifies the approval. But I don't see any way to do it at this meeting.
Yeah, but you can't abstain unless you have a conflict. So it's either a yes that you're approving or you say no if you don't approve.
I'm abstaining. I do have to vote yes or no?
Yeah, if you don't approve, then you would vote no right now. If you do approve, then you would vote yes.
Well, I'm going to vote no then.
Mr. Marcus?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
You're muted, Dave. There you go.
I'll say yes and hold my fingers. I may have a neighborhood problem, but anyway.
Call me if you
Ms. Cesaro?
She's on mute.
You're still muted.
Bottom left.
There
I
we go.
approve. Yes,
Okay.
I approve.
Hi, Ms. Hunter, welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Chavon?
Yes.
Chair Blank?
Yes.
Okay. 6 to 1.
The item passes. And, Ms. Lyons, I certainly understand your concern here. And I think that this discussion really brings up a point that this is one of those spots where we can probably make some recommendations to clean up a little bit of this language to help on our decision making going forward. So Trish, I'm going to ask you to do something for me. Can you just make a note of this? And I want to get with you offline, and I want to start kind of keeping track of these things. And maybe as a board, we can bring it together in the future with kind of a listing of things that we think need to be addressed and clarified, so we can make one comprehensive recommendation of some of these finer points. So let's try to keep that in mind as we go forward with some of this wording.
For example, we could get in a huge argument about what the words preferably picket style.
Right.
Right.
Huge fight about that. The point is that it needs to be more precise.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I think that the guidance should be guidance as opposed to so ambiguous with things like this. I agree.
I agree.
Yeah, so that your point is certainly well taken. Mr. Rosa, thank you so much for bringing that item, and congratulations on having that passed. Having no other items for the board to consider, we are at the communication to the City Commission. I don't believe we have any or really have any need for any at this time, unless anybody else believes that we need to communicate anything to the City Commission.
I do have a question for Trish, though.
Sure.
These issues that we've talked about of historic elements inside the historic district of Sailboat Bend repeatedly come up to the board. I mean, we've had this a number of times with fences, with windows, with doors, with roofs. At some point, Trish, didn't we talk about trying to, I don't know how you amend the documents, but to take a fresh look, or for somebody to take a fresh look at all this? How can that happen?
So for the Sailboat Bend Historic District, I've actually conducted an updated architectural resource survey, and that is available on our website.
So Trish, let me just cut you off there for a minute, because I want to get into that when we talk about the good of the city. I just want to make sure, because I also want to address your point from earlier, but let me just make sure that we have no communication to the City Commission at this point from any of the board members. All right, so now let's talk about matters for the good of the city. Trish, please go ahead and continue with that thought, and then I want to go back, Arthur, to your thought from earlier in the meeting as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do you guys want to do the actual item that's on for the good of the city?
Let's do that. Let's do that last. We'll make sure that we approve that last. But I know, Trish, you want to address this specific topic. And I think there was another as well that you brought up to me that you wanted to bring up. So let's go address those. So
there's an updated architectural resource survey for the Sailboat Bend Historic District. Property owners within the district have been noticed that is available on our website for them to view and to comment on until October 25th. And it does have a full report of the resource survey available for viewing, as well as proposed updates to the ordinance. So right now there's an option for anyone to go online and just submit a form with comments regarding the current proposal. And then what would happen moving forward is that it would go in front of the Historic Preservation Board, the Planning and Zoning Board, and ultimately the City Commission for review and potential adoption.
So one of the things that I wanted to address regarding that was addressed earlier in the meeting. Mr. Powell, you'll remember, had written us a correspondence, which we made part of the minutes on the first item. And he cited to the fact of what he believed was the outdated report, the 2009 survey from Sailboat Bend Historic District. And what I would like to do would be send a correspondence to Mr. Powell as chair of the board, notifying him that Trish is undertaking this updated survey, and that if to notify him also of what steps could be taken for his participation in comment or addressing or reviewing of the survey, to notify him. I think it's important that when members of the community reach out to us and say, look, I have an issue with what the board is doing, that we can communicate with them what steps are being taken to address an issue that they may raise if there is one. We currently are having this survey done. So with the approval of the board, I'd love to be able to send a correspondence to him on behalf of the board, just notifying him of that. Does anybody have any issue with that?
No.
I think it's a great idea, and I think it should be also in some way provided notice to the Civic Association, because I know it's always constantly on their agenda as well. So just to know that it's being looked at. I believe
I believe Mr. Glassman was there speaking to it last time about waiving some of the fees that need to be paid in order to discuss what are otherwise just permitting issues in other parts of town that are not governed by the historic district. So I think it's a great idea to at least acknowledge it, if not take a further action on it.
Who would be providing the communication?
Me, as chair.
Oh, okay. Because my only suggestion would be because, you know, Trish is the one that's doing all of this. It may be more appropriate for it to come from staff.
Yeah, and I certainly appreciate that perspective, but I think it's important that the board, the board speaks directly to a member of the public who reaches out to us in this fashion. I think that what we can do is direct him to reach out to Trish for information, as well as maybe provide the email address, and of course CC, Trish and even the Sailboat Bend, Civic Association. I think that'd be great. Let's CC them on the correspondence. But I think that this is the type of thing where the board should, or again, I as chair of the board should personally reach out. There's a lot to be said for that kind of personal communication that I think instills confidence in the public and what we do, and they don't just think that we're constantly disregarding them and then passing them off to staff. So that's my preference. And Ms. Wallen, unless there is some prohibition on that, that would be my intent.
No, not at all. I just wanted to make sure that everything that Tricia was doing was, included in the correspondence. But of course, you and her can talk offline if that, that's.
Yeah, I'm gonna work with Trish on the correspondence because my intent, and just so everybody's clear, my intent is to keep it broad. I'm not getting into specifics. I'm going to refer him to Trish for specifics, but I just think that a direct correspondence from us would be important. Tim, are you raising your hand?
I think I have a question for Sherry. If I was to go online and do this survey that Tricia put out there for suggestions or comments on Sailboat Bend's rule, would I have to abstain from voting on it if it came back around in front of us, in front of the Historic Preservation Board for consideration?
Only if there was a conflict in accordance with the statute. So if you had like some sort of financial benefit from what you were doing, which I'm not sure if there is or there isn't.
So it's just my opinion. If it's just my opinion and my philosophy of how it ought to be, as long as there's no financial gain or some sort of tangible gain to me, I would be able to vote on it.
Then you wouldn't have to abstain, no.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so if the board's okay with it, then my intent would be to work with Trish to put together that communication and send that out to Mr. Powell, and then CC the Sailboat Bend Civic Association on that.
Dave Parker has something to say.
Dave, I'm sorry. Yeah, you were on my next screen. I apologize. Go ahead, Dave. Unmute yourself though, because it's still getting. Wait, get in there. There you go. We're good.
Okay. It says just the opposite, but whatever. Anyway, the discussion that is in the neighborhood, in the sense, is obviously very heated at this point. And I think the inclusion of the chairman being part of the presentation or part of the package of the communication, I think is very important, because many times in the past, the board has been accused of things or has taken the blunt of some of the things which maybe are not appropriately. And I think that would be good to show representation from the board.
I appreciate your support of the idea, Dave. Thanks. All right, so
Trish, I have one last comment. Sorry.
Do it.
The process, as Tricia just outlined, it would be that we should be going online to the city's website and then handing in the comment sheet. Would it make sense? I'm just throwing this out for consideration. Once we throw out the comment sheet, for us to talk as a board, or this is certainly a public discussion, but I'm just wondering if we need one round of discussion before we gear up for the big public discussion. We've all had examples in the past of public discussions about some of these items, and it has not been pretty. So I'm just wondering how better to do this.
So maybe we put this, and Trish, you can either agree or disagree, but my thought, and I don't disagree with Arthur. I think it's good if we as a board kind of address this, see the public comment a little bit before we bring it out, for a fully noticed hearing. But maybe we place it on our agenda for the next meeting for the good of the city. We all review it. And then that way we can have a discussion as a board on this topic, an informed discussion on this issue before a publicly noticed, meeting specifically addressing this issue. Trish, what are your thoughts on that, if any?
If the board wishes to do that, then there would need to be a motion to place it on the next agenda.
So is that something that the board would be inclined to do, to have a discussion on this specific issue as part of our agenda moving forward?
I like
your idea, Jason, of doing it as a good of the city, but I'd like to hear what everybody else feels.
I think it's a good idea.
All right, so then I'll entertain a motion to place it on the next agenda, if anybody had one.
And I'll second your motion.
All right, so we'll say Mr. Marcus moved, Ms. Lyons seconded the motion. All in favor of this being placed on the agenda for a discussion as part of the For the Good of the City of Fort Lauderdale section, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries unanimously. So this will be placed on our next agenda for board discussion as part of our For the Good of the City of Fort Lauderdale section of that meeting. Wonderful.
Can we also get a motion for the correspondence, just to clarify that you'll be representing the board?
Yeah, so let me formulate my request, and then I'll see if there's a motion to approve it. My request would be for authorization to speak on behalf of the board by way of a communication to Mr. Powell and the Sailboat Bend Civic Association, working with Ms. Logan to formulate the language and body of that correspondence to address the fact that a survey is currently underway. An updated survey is currently underway for the Sailboat Bend Historic District. So if that sounds like something that somebody would want to move to allow me to do, that would be great.
I'd move to approve that.
Moved by Mr. Rosa. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Marcus. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much. I'll get working with Trish on that, and we'll try to get that correspondence out quickly. Trish, did you have another item that you wanted to address for the good of the city other than what's on the agenda?
I just wanted to mention that last year we received a $50,000 grant from the state of Florida to conduct architectural resource surveys of several neighborhoods within the city, and was hired to conduct those surveys, and now the results are also available on our website. So following this meeting, I'll send you links to both, just so you have a direct access. But there were 8 different neighborhoods that were looked at this time. We also have a new grant that was provided for a smaller amount for $10,000 for an additional resource survey that will be initiated in the coming months. So again, another consultant, or potentially the same consultant, depending on how it shakes out with the bidding process, then we'll conduct another architectural resource survey of one more neighborhood with that funding.
Wonderful.
So, Trish, I have a question. So with these 8 new neighborhoods and these 8 new surveys, what's the game plan going forward?
So the purpose of the architectural resource surveys is first and foremost to collect information and document the history of the city and identify properties that are significant to the city, so that when there are requests for information or requests for documentation of areas within the city of Fort Lauderdale that are significant, then we have that on hand to be able to provide to the requester. There's always an option for a property owner to request the designation of their own property. We also have other options outlined within the code for nonprofit organizations or motions by the City Commission or the Historic Preservation Board to initiate that type of application. At this time, for the surveys that were just completed, communication has just gone out to the civic associations for those neighborhoods. So right now they're reviewing that information. We did offer to provide a presentation to those organizations if they desire to get more information. So right now it's informational.
And so it'll be informational until at some point it comes before us as a board.
So it won't come before you as a board for action unless it's requested by the city commission or the board.
So what purpose are these studies being done for?
Like I said, it's for documentation, for to provide a thorough understanding of what's available in our city, the history of our city, the history of development. Having it on our website provides public accessibility. We also filed forms with the state of Florida, this is a state-funded grant. So all of the properties that were surveyed have a Florida Master Site File form that's now filed with the state. So it's accessible by anyone statewide if you request that from the state of Florida. But at this time, I don't have any direction to move anything forward through a designation process. And right now, like I said, I'm communicating with the Civic Association so that they are informed of what the findings are.
So it's an informational aspect, essentially?
What's that?
It's an informational aspect, essentially?
Correct, yeah, so that they can view what the findings are, and you're welcome to take a look as well. But like I said, I don't have any further direction on that.
If you could keep us updated, if there are any changes or movement in that work that's being done, that would be great.
Yep.
And I would just like to add, if you could forward all those links to us, would be very helpful.
Yes, I'll do that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Trish. Go ahead, Ms. Lyons.
No, I was just thinking, Trish.
And Trish, thanks for everything that you do. I know we say it, not often enough, but thank you really for all the work that you do and the communication that you give to the board. It helps us immensely in our work. All right, so then we do have one last item that's actually on the agenda. It's the approval of our 2021 Historic Preservation Board meeting dates. I trust everybody has had a chance to review those. If you haven't, they are attached to the agenda. We do need to approve these, I believe. Do we need a motion on these dates? Sherry, maybe, Trish?
Yes, we typically do.
Please.
Okay, so at this point in time, I mean, obviously, look, the dates are flexible. We all know that, but we need to vote on our 2021 schedule. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the proposed 2021 HPB meeting dates, if one was to be had.
I'll move to approve.
Moved by Mr. Marcus. Don't be shy to second.
I'll second.
All right, Ms. Lyons seconds. Thank you so much. We have a motion and a second to approve the 2021 Historic Preservation Board meeting dates as contained in tonight's agenda and meeting materials. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you so much, everybody. If there are no other matters for the good of the city of Fort Lauderdale, if there are, speak up now. Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thanks for taking the time.
Jason, congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Congratulations.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we had our first child, Caden Ethan Blank, was born on September 16th. He is strong and in good health. So
God bless you.
No rest for you.
Arthur, thank you for being ready to take the helm tonight. I almost had to run off to a doctor's appointment with my boy, but he's all right. So thank you.
Okay, great.
All right, everybody. Great seeing you all. Thanks for the efficient work
everyone.
we did tonight. And Mr. Rosa, congratulations again on that. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Night.
Yes. I'm sorry.